What I really want to focus in on, and this is, I think, something even more controversial than black-white differences, is the IQ of a group called the South Asians / North Africans. On the map, this is a yellow, orangey segment that goes right across North Africa, all the way out to Bangladesh. And genetic studies show that this is a very heterogeneous population, but there are some genetic similarities among that group that goes from Bangladesh through the Indian subcontinent, India, out through Pakistan, Afghanistan, into Turkey and the Middle East, Iran, down through Saudi Arabia, into Jordan, the Arab population of Israel, Egypt, and all the way across North Africa. This particular grouping is different from the Europeans to their north, the sub-Saharan Africans to their south, and obviously the East Asians to their east. And they have an average IQ of 85. And there are about 60 different studies showing that. And furthermore, if you look at the immigrants from those countries, in England or Holland or South Africa or Mauritius or Fiji or the different places that they have immigrated to, their IQs are commensurate with the the original populations from where they come. So this is pretty reliable stuff. If you go to the next slide, you'll see some indication here of just how reliable those data are. This is actually taken from Steve Saylor's essay. He did a big review of Richard Lynn's book. And one of the things he did was to plot the stability of those IQ scores for three different populations. I think at the top end is the Japanese and Japan. In the middle, it's the Hispanic populations to America. And at the very bottom is the Australian Aborigines, which I didn't actually mention, but they're even lower IQ than the sub-Saharan Africans. And he shows that across time, the different studies that have been done, they don't change much. They're just consistent and reliable and so on. And that shows, to some extent, how reliable these data are. If we go to the next slide, this again is a measure of the reliability, and it also illustrates something else. These are the Chinese in China and the Indians in India across time. But what it also shows is that there's no comparison. We're always hearing in the media that India is a new superpower, just like China. Well, yes, it's true of China. China will have a man on the moon. They'll have a manned moon station up there permanently. They are potentially a great competitor or a great ally, cooperator with the United States. They have the brains to be equal or higher than we are. India, that's just not the case. The average IQ in India is 85. So, yes, they're growing in economics, but they're not China, and you can see that from that slide. Okay, if we go to the next slide, this is the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. 10 years ago now, I went to South Africa and collected some data myself, because when Richard Lynn began to publish these studies 10 years ago, there weren't quite as many as there are today. It seemed to me crucially important for myself to go out there and double check that these numbers were accurate. If I was going to put my own reputation on the line, such as it is, I was going to have to be sure that what he was saying was accurate. Because it's so easy to imagine that the IQ scores were just spasmodically thrown together and weren't very, very reliable. So 10 years ago, I wanted to make sure that they were reliable. And if you go to the next slide, this is Mervyn Sky, who is an educational psychologist at the University of Witwatersrand, who I teamed up with. We go to the next slide. These are some of his students that we worked with. Altogether, we published in the scientific peer-reviewed journals 6 different studies of African IQ. And some of his students were black, some of them were Cape-colored, some of them were South Asians. And we did this because one of the things, little technical items in the literature, is that the people gathering the data should be of the same race as the people being tested. In fact, it really makes no difference at all, but this is just an indication of how careful we wanted to be in order to be able to persuade our peers that these data were accurate, whatever they turned out to show. If you go to the next slide, we had absolutely wonderful testing facilities. This is a huge examination hall, well lit, air conditioned, chairs and tables well apart from one another. They had plenty of time in order to do, gave them 3 hours if they wanted to take it, to do basically a 20-minute test. We paid them, they were very well motivated, and there were blacks and whites and South Asians and East Asians. And we altogether tested something like 1,500, in fact I think it was like 1,600 African undergraduate students. We had, if you go to the next slide, this is the kind of puzzle that we gave them. These are non-verbal tests, very well accepted psychological tests that people use all around the world. It's actually called the Raven's Progressive Matrices. What you have to do is, there's a missing piece at the very top, and what you have to do is to go down and find among the 5 or 6 items the one that you think fits. In fact, it's number 4, it's the black square that goes in there. And the tests that we give have 60 of these different puzzles. And so it's the total score that then counts, and you compare that to what white people do or East Asians people do, and you translate them into IQ equivalents. So that's what we did, and what we found was that, yes, Richard Lynn basically was correct, that the average general population level was 70. And we even went in search of the highest African IQs that we could possibly find. So we looked for engineers in the end. We considered lawyers and medical people and so on, but we went for engineers because these people had taken maths and science all the way through high school. They had passed with matriculation on those subjects. And even, you know, in America, taking maths and science as an undergrad, as a high school student is not the highest interest level. Well, among black Africans, it's even lower interest level. So these were the nerdiest, most intelligent black Africans that we could find. They'd gone into the University of Witwatersrand. They wanted to pursue a career and a degree in engineering. And they ended up with an IQ, the highest IQ that we've ever tested in black Africa. And they ended up with an IQ even as high as 103. But if you make the assumption that they are 30 points higher than the general population, just like students at, say, Caltech or MIT or Harvard might be 30 points higher, especially if they're taking maths and engineering, then you have to subtract 30 to get the population level, and that's what we did, and that was commensurate with an IQ of 70. In any case, if you go to the next slide, this is Soweto, which is basically a suburb, if you like, of Johannesburg. And as you can see, the living conditions are absolutely awful. These are tin shacks. There's no electricity. There's no paved roads. There's no running water. It's a nightmare at night. There's thousands of children. It's a very violent place. You would not want to raise your child in one of these houses and expect your child to do homework at night and do well in school and go on to university. And so it's very easy for people to look at these kinds of cultural conditions and say, well, yeah, that's causing the IQ of 70. And maybe it is. That's a very reasonable hypothesis. But on the other hand, you could also turn it around and say, yes, and if you had a population base with an IQ of 70, these are the kinds of living conditions they would produce. This is the kind of civilization you would expect. So how is it possible to tease apart these two alternative, perfectly well-formed, coherent hypotheses? And that's what I'm going to talk about in about 2 minutes. Next slide.